everyone. I was nervous before, but that's broken away now. So I'm going to be giving my talk on insect ecology and management in urban landscapes. I'll be presenting some old research that we have been doing and then talking about the future studies that I plan on doing for my master's. And so first, we're going to talk about the regional effects of turfgrass cultivar mixtures. We know that all warm season turfgrass is grown as monocultures, and that leaves it susceptible to pest. So our lab has been doing research on mixing cultivars to see if that could help with warm season turfgrass having resiliency to pests. And so today I'm going to talk about that in the context of weeds and insects. So like I said before, monocultures run a higher risk for pest and herbivore attack. There have been studies that shown the larval stage of pests, they do have a preference for lower diversity plantings. And that means that these monocultures rely heavily on maintenance inputs. So high diversity has shown benefits against pests, and it helps decrease things like their colonization rates, the body sizes, and herbivory. Those all decrease as diversity is increased. So if you're asking yourself, why is cultivar mixing important? It's because of things like this. We believe that mixing cultivars could serve as a new IPM tactic in turf. It creates less favorable habitats for the pests, therefore reducing pest populations within those diverse plantings. Also, there's an increased competitiveness of turfgrass against weeds, and we'll be addressing that in the next few slides. And additionally, increasing diversity can reduce the frequency of herbicide and insecticide use, and that is very important when it comes to environmental impacts. These are some photos from our planting trips during the summer of 2019, and as you can see, there's different little plugs that all represent certain cultivars in the mixtures. So moving on to diversity in weeds, there is a very low tolerance amongst homeowners for weed pressure. It's usually around 5 to 10% of their lawn. And that number is driven by the neighborhood norm, is what I like to call it. And it's basically how your neighbors perceive your yard determines how weedy you'd let it go. We know that mixed plantings do have the ability to reduce economic and environmental impacts of herbicide use, and therefore we decided that we would like to conduct a field study to determine the effects of cultivar diversity specifically on weed pressure. And so to the right, I have two of the common warm season turfgrass weeds. That's crabgrass at the top and spotted surge. So for this weed study, it began in July of 2019. We were going out into the plots and physically visually assessing them and marking the different species of weeds that were present. In the summer of 2020, after restrictions were lifted, we were going out and doing photo analysis of the weed plots. And so we'd go out with my phone and take 5 photos per plot. They were all in an X pattern. And from then we would analyze the photos online for weed cover and weed biodiversity. So we have a little bit of preliminary data from that. We know that the mix of 4 cultivars grew more densely than the others, and that could possibly be to the differing vertical vegetation profiles that you have as you increase diversity. We also knew that blended mixtures kept weed cover significantly lower than monocultures. And so looking at figure 1 here, the dotted lines that you see with the very high spike in September, that is representative of weed cover in monocultures. The dashed line is the mix of 2s, and the solid line is the mix of 4s. And so we can see that the mix of 2s and mix of 4, they're not significant from each other, but they are significantly lower than monocultures throughout the entirety of the experiment. And that's according to weed cover. So now I'm going to move on to the future studies. That was previous studies. For my master's thesis, it is broken up into 2 separate parts, an observational study and a manipulative study. And so for the observational study, my objectives are I would like to know how cultivar diversity affects pests and beneficial arthropods. And I also would like to know how their geographic locations interact with cultivar diversity to influence pests. And so at the top left, these are our 4 field sites that we use for the previous research I talked about. And I'm still going to be using the same field sites, deploying pitfall traps. The furthest north, that is in Jackson, North Carolina. Here is at J, Florida, the Milton REC. The one in the middle of Florida is the Citra site, and then at the very furthest southernmost point, we have the Fort Lauderdale REC site. And so I'm going to be taking pitfalls and IDing all of the arthropods, beneficial and pests, that come from these different mixtures. For the manipulative study, first introducing the idea of associational resistance, that's beneficial plant-plant interactions against herbivory. And so the objectives for my manipulative study are, I would like to qualify chinch bug damage on the focal plant floor tam, and I would do that through a photo analysis, much similar to the one that we see down here. And that photo analysis will help me assess the quality of the grass throughout the experiment, and also take note of any damage that we're seeing being caused by the chinch bug. And for objective 2, I'd like to determine how mixture compositions affect chinch bugs specifically. And so I'm going to be measuring things like their body size, herbivory rates, and then fecundity as well, because we would like to find out which mixtures keep fecundity at the lowest, meaning the next generation will be smaller and hopefully smaller and smaller. So to summarize my thesis on why any of that is important, we have a new type of grass that hasn't been studied before. So IDing arthropod organisms living in these cultivar mixtures, they could help us to specify the recommendations according to geographic locations if there's any difference in the arthropods according to the geographic location. And the thesis will also help with recommendations for reducing chinch bug herbivory. Like I said, finding that specific mixture that continuously reduces fecundity, body size, herbivory, that's the most important part of what's going to come from this. So thank you.